Yeah. Hi, everybody. This is Dave Canfield of Screen Anarchy, your Creature Feature Preacher, here to talk with Paul Gundersman and Peter Hall about their new film, Man Finds Tape. It's a found footage or point of view horror film. I really loved it. Uh,
Thank you.
it has somebody that I'm a little acquainted with, John Golson, who I'm real fond of in it. And I'm just really happy for you guys, and I'm anxious to hear how things went at Tribeca and to talk about some of the themes in the film. How did it go at Tribeca?
Thank you.
And yeah, thank you. It went amazing. I mean, we're a small movie coming out of Texas. We didn't know what to expect, but I think it went better than we could have hoped for. The audience reactions were amazing. The Q&As were great, and the reviews have been cool. Just seeing how people are connecting with this weird idea we've had for like 4.5 years.
That's how
Yeah, it was
ideas are, huh?
fantastic. We had three sold out screenings. I mean, Paul and I have spent a lot of time at film festivals. People stuck around for the Q&As, which doesn't necessarily always happen. So I think we hooked people in the right ways.
Yeah, those ideas, they just haunt you, don't they?
Yeah.
And they never go away, and then sometimes really good things come out of them. The Creature Preacher Feature, or the Creature Preacher Feature, Creature Feature Preacher, was like that for me.
Yeah.
It was thrown at me by somebody else because I'm a seminary grad.
Okay.
Um,
Hmm.
and I got a master's in theological studies and another one in public ministry. And so your movie really struck a chord with me. I was
Oh,
fascinated,
that's cool.
particularly because I'm what you call a liberal boogerhead. So uh, I could sense the wrestling with that topic of religion and faith and corruption and all those things. Where did the idea come from?
The overall idea for the film,
Yeah.
or the more theological aspects of it as well. I mean, they kind of happened hand in hand. The idea for the film, just the quick version of it, was it started as a podcast, like a fictionalized podcast. We are going to do it essentially as a radio play. This was years ago. We never really went too far down that path with it. That's just where the initial idea of a journalist going to investigate this strange piece of footage in a Texas town and falling down the rabbit hole started. And then we kind of put that in a drawer for a while. And when we came back to the idea of Paul and I making our first feature, we quickly looked at what we had strengths with. And one of them was Paul has a documentary background. He produces documentaries as part of his day job and has for many years. And so we thought, okay, well, what if we did a fictional documentary? And then that instantly kind of clicked back with the idea of this viral video that was going around. And so we then reshaped the story, fleshed it out a bit more, turned it into a brother and sister story, investigating this piece of footage that went back to their childhood in unexpected ways, and how their childhood then intertwined with this preacher named Reverend Endicott Carr. And we kind of kept picking it apart and rebuilding it over and over and over until we got to the version that you've now seen.
Okay.
And I think kind of answering the part about the more theological, religious aspect of it, I think it all kind of just came out of the parameters that we created for ourselves, like Peter was talking about with the documentary format. Again, we're first feature kind of situation, so we're trying to come up with parameters where we have control. So shooting near where we live in Austin, Texas was a big part of it. So it's like, okay, our setting is going to be Texas. And then religion is a big thing everywhere, but especially in Texas and small town Texas. And when we were talking about kind of who would be a person in power in a small random town, a fictional town, and a
Yeah.
preacher just kind of made the most sense as someone who has a lot of influence. Um, and yeah, that just kind of led us down that path. And I don't think we ever considered anything else. That was just like one of the very first ideas. It was like, oh yeah, it should be just like a local preacher.
Oh, now, were you afraid at all that you were getting into territory that's been done a lot? the idea of the preacher who's the bad guy and everything. Not that there aren't a lot of preacher bad guys, but I'm curious how much you wrestled with the locus of, like, of this, because in a lot of ways, Reverend Endicott, which by the way, what a great name, Carr Endicott.
Yeah, thank you.
Um, I I see him as a pretty complex character.
It was, I don't know that Paul and I really wrestled with the idea of having so much of the story revolve around the Reverend and what he may or may not be up to, in the sense that that character has, more or less been done. We agree with you. But I think the thing that we did wrestle with was, okay, since there are cliches and tropes around religion and horror, how do we sidestep those? Like, what are the pitfalls we want to avoid? And one of the things that we did talk about a lot ourselves, and then with John Gulson when he came on, is who is this character? What are his plans? His what is his background beyond just him being a reverend? Because he does fit into our mythology in a very interesting way. And so I do think that we had a bit of confidence knowing that even if people are familiar with, a reverend up to no good in a horror movie, they hopefully aren't as familiar with our kind of reverend and specifically what he is up to.
And
Yeah,
I
no,
think too, a lot of what John Golson brought to the performance really brought it to life and honestly changed the film, changed the edit, changed the story in a lot of great ways, in ways that we hadn't kind of visualized when we were writing it. And so that was, I think that helped kind of shape it into something more unique.
Yeah, I mean, I'll confess that our had we gone with the original scripted plan for Endicott, he probably would have been more cliche and more of a horror trope because he was conceived of as a older, frailer, taller
oh yeah.
Tom Noonan type, and it wasn't until we started talking to John and he sent us some reference materials of small town evangelists that he was familiar with that we were like, oh, okay, yeah, we can break the mold a little bit farther by going with someone who has the outward presence that John does.
I've been reading
We
a lot.
really,
Oh, go ahead.
sorry, I was going to throw one thing. We really worked with all of our actors a lot to work with them to bring the characters to life rather than just saying, read the words on the page. Like everything really morphed and molded to the actors and what they brought to the table and kind of challenging the material we had written for them and then kind of finding the sweet spot in the middle.
I mean, one of the things that reminded me of is I've been reading a lot lately about Julian Beck, the actor that played, he founded the Living Theater, among other things, which is a huge accomplishment. But he also played the Reverend in Poltergeist 2. Uh, and, what a marvelous, he was dying actually of cancer at the time. So he had this amazingly cadaverous appearance. And, you're gonna die in there, just like what a, but he was complex, and you really did almost want to believe him, until he starts shrieking at you, and the rain cloud rains only over him, and he walks away. Um, and John, who I just can't sing the praises of enough here, brings a real humanity to Reverend Carr, and I walked away from this film with a real sense of how we struggle with trust these days in any institution, in each other, in our own instincts about what's right and wrong, and it's it's kind of heartbreaking to watch, um, because it seems like so many of these characters feel trapped. They're not able necessarily to get the broader view of where they're at and what's wrong and what to do about it.
I mean, that was those themes were something that Paul and I were very much hoping that people would pick up on, because they're both subtle and not that subtle, at least to us, like because we were very targetedly building towards some of those themes. I mean, the film wasn't quite as on the nose as it has since become since we made it, because when we first started writing this and thinking of it a couple of years ago, it was the idea that people would be presented with footage of themselves being complicit in crimes or being presented with crimes that were happening around them and not being able to fundamentally acknowledge it was more of an abstract idea a few years ago than it is now, I think. And then the flip side of that is it's one of those things we have characters, not just Endicott, where you see him very visibly expressing guilt at times in unexpected ways. But then there are also other characters that, like the character of Boone, that's played by Graham Skipper, who, even though he's used in very sort of surgical moments, you can see him sort of grappling with wanting to understand what's happening around him, but then sort of retreating to a place of actually, it's better for me if I just don't examine my part in this story.
Right.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, it's sad. I mean, I think, was it yesterday that the Secretary of the Army, or I think it's Secretary of the Army, was quoted and filmed as saying that we currently have a man on the moon, a soldier, and that they had spoken to him for Father's Day and stuff. And you kind of go, that's so frightening on any level, no matter how you look at that, that's terrifying. Either they got a guy on the moon and nobody knows how and what the heck, and I mean, what kind of magicians are these, sorcerers are these people? Or obviously, obviously the reality is they're willing to lie and they won't examine it, they won't look at it, they don't see anything wrong with it, and they see themselves, as people often do, as the heroes of their own story when they are very clearly not. And I mean, it seems like we have an entire country confronted with that paradigm right now. And some people who are willing to examine it and some aren't. Were you guys aware of how, because like you said, your film goes right to a more on the nose point from its development to now. Well, that's what's happened to our country. That mirrors the reality of our country.
I
Yeah,
think
I mean,
that yeah, I'll just say so. I think, like we started writing this in January 21. We're coming right out of the pandemic. I mean, still kind of in it at that point. And again, these like AI was kind of just barely a buzzword maybe then. Like it was definitely not the thing it is now. And I think Peter and I were just intrigued by this concept of the disinformation age, which, in early 21 was kind of just a fraction of what it has become. And I think
Yeah,
that, you know, good sci-fi, good horror, et cetera, just kind of is, fortune telling the future sort of thing. And I think it wasn't a crazy leap to be intrigued by this concept. And it's unfortunate that it's uh, become more as relevant as it is with the film, just in terms of the world. But yeah, Peter, what were you going to say?
yeah, I think the idea that Paul and I started to explore when we were putting together what are the actual events that are happening in this small town? What is the monster at the center of our story up to? We were sort of coming up with how would someone fly under the radar and exist for years and years and years, and how would they thrive in a modern age of disinformation, of of not being caught for their crimes, or for the way that they're exploiting people. And so we started off by wanting to explore that, and I think we, to be honest, kind of stumbled into larger themes that became uh, more and more applicable as time went on. And the sad reality is, I don't know that they're going to become less applicable because the story is fundamentally about characters. For Lucas Page, for example, who's one of our main characters, who sort of falls down these internet rabbit holes.
yeah,
I don't know that those rabbit holes are going to go away. I don't think people's want to pursue weird theories and
yeah.
want to uncover strange truths online is gonna go away anytime soon. And so I think we're gonna see more and more characters that are both A on the Lucas side of things and B on the Reverend Endicott side of things.
Yeah, it's interesting how, I mean, Peter and I grew up with the internet, and just exploring IRC internet relay chat channels and like old school stuff like that, and just seeing the dark, weird corners of the internet that like you had to sit down at a computer on dial-up and log into, but then you could turn off, become what is surrounding us constantly. Where now you kind of have to do the opposite. You have to intentionally sit down and disconnect to be away from it. I think it was just kind of growing up from teenagers to now and experiencing that was just kind of what we felt equipped to talk about at the time, what the subject matter we felt equipped to make a film about.
I mean, I did my master's in theological studies. My thesis was on the rhetoric of satanic panic. And
Mm,
these days, satanic panic it's a subject everybody talks about. I lived through it. I mean, I turned 60 this year, and the roots
Congrats.
of satanic panic to me are not in this sort of weird medieval Renaissance view we have of the character of Satan, right? Um, as much as they are in conspiracy theory and in the always the fear of the other, whether it's the communist plot or rock and roll is going to turn our children
mhm.
into closet black people or whatever. And I think that um, on the one hand, when I was growing up, right, you had the JFK thing was starting to take off, and who knows what happened there. But you also start to get shows like In Search of, and that's
Mhm.
incredible. And Ripley's Believe It or Not, and the Guinness Book of World Records specials, and you have Edgar Casey, and a lot of people trying to predict the future. And then Hal Lindsey comes out with Late Great Planet Earth, and what that does is it sets all that in a bubble, and it says you can use the Bible by shifting texts around like Scrabble tiles to give
Mm.
you a predictor of the political future of the world. And now we see how the incredibly dark directions that has taken everybody. And again, it all goes back to conspiracy theory, which has both an innocent side and a fun-loving side. Leonard Nimoy, do vampires exist? It's just like you spend half an hour with Leonard Nimoy going over every silly cliched tropey thing about, parapsychology around vampires. Um, but then there's like the sense of like, how can I use this to make money, control others? They're all out to get me. That sort of rigid, weird paranoia. Um, did you guys have a sense of the childlikeness aspect of conspiracy theories growing up?
I for sure did. I once talked for Paul, but I mean, it for me. It kind of the gateway there was the X-Files,
Yeah.
and partly because my older brother, told me just flat out making it up, but he told me, and I believed that every episode of the X-Files is based on a true story.
Yeah,
That was
because I mean,
So
Adrian told you
yeah,
that.
my older brother Adrian told me that. So I spent
That's
like
great.
I don't know several years between the ages of like 8 and 10 or something, believing that was the case. But then I got into reading books about UFOs. The school that I went to, my middle school, had a like encyclopedia of the unknown, this like
oh
five
yeah,
volume thing that had spontaneous combustion and stuff in it. So like I was all into reading all of that stuff and was very much so of the school of I want to believe.
you read about
Yeah.
Mary Reeser, the woman in
Mary
Florida who
Reeser.
she burst into flame in her little armchair, and they only found her foot, and nothing else in the apartment was burned.
I'm sure it was in that Encyclopedia of the Unknown. I
Uh,
can picture a
It's
like
true.
I can picture the photograph of one of the example that they used for spontaneous combustion.
uh.
Um,
Yeah, I mean, same. Like, grew up on X Files and all that kind of stuff, watching with my dad, and I think it as a kid and in that time, like 30 years ago, plus the idea of a conspiracy theory was more harmless and fun.
Yeah,
And it was, I can understand anybody getting sucked into a conspiracy theory because it
right.
is just, it's a puzzle. It's like, oh, I want to know. And it's hard to maintain objectivity when you're just getting pulled into a story. And that's what conspiracy theories often are. It's just a well-crafted story. So, um, yeah.
yeah, and when we were putting this together, we wanted to make a film that if you approached it just from the angle of of treating it kind of like an X-Files episode. You could have fun. You could
Oh,
just
it could.
have
That's
fun with its
possible. Yeah.
mythology and its weird characters doing weird stuff that get increasingly out of control. But if you wanted to, like yourself, dive a little deeper into the themes, and hopefully there's more to unpack there as well.
Yeah. No, I thought you really succeeded on both those points. Um,
Thank you.
I I know it's weird because for me, I became a conscious Christian when I was 19, and at this point, again, I'm far more liberal in my understanding of that. But I
Mhm.
definitely went through that thing in life where, I lived in a religious community for 30 years, and we were evangelical and fairly pretty tolerant culturally,
Mhm.
but hung up on all the usual BS. And when I grew out of that, when I stopped engaging with all that like it was written stone and asking questions, I didn't find that my search for meaning got less. I didn't find
Mhm.
myself getting more cynical. I felt myself wanting to connect to wonder. And that's something you guys do in this film is you give us like this sort of dark wonder of like there is something going on underneath the surface. We don't completely understand it, but it's there and it's important to make room for it.
Yeah.
That's really great to hear. And it reminds me there was a question we got in one of the Q&As, which was I can't remember exactly what the question was, but it was something along the lines of explain what this character was doing, what the stranger was doing. And we struggled to answer it
Yeah.
because we're like, part of what we think makes the movie work is what you just described, is the mystery, is the unknown, and it makes you have to engage with it on a level. And if Peter and I know what's going on, but if we just come out there and just say, here's exactly what it all means and what happened, then we're taking away something from the viewer. I'd love to talk about that one day, maybe like a year after it comes out or something. But to start with, it's just kind of, we're not trying to be artsy fartsy when we're like, oh no, we won't tell you what it's about. But we're kind of like, it's kind of the point. Like if we just show you the solution to the puzzle, now you don't want to play with the
Yeah.
puzzle.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of reviews have picked up on the sort of Lovecraftian side of it,
Yeah.
and I think that the what Lovecraft is to me, who I'm a big fan of his stories, is he's at his best when he's just hinting at this weird cosmic world that characters are stumbling into, and their choice to either go further or not is what drives them insane. And so I think that one of the things that we wanted to do was create that sense that like our characters are brushing up on the periphery of a much bigger story. Um, and in moments it is genuinely awe-inspiring, like on a visual level, but it's also on a conceptual level to the characters. It is a very like they have fundamental moments of I'm gonna go insane if I pursue this further kind of thing.
Well, there's this quote from G.K. Chesterton, who was this amazing apologetics guy, convert to a convert to Christianity and then Catholicism, and his gig was he weighed about 300 or 400 pounds, and he would wear capes and swords in public, and he was wrote dozens and dozens and dozens of books. Real brilliant mind, real cool guy, and he said that a madman isn't a man who looks up at the sky. A madman is the one who thinks he can fit all the stars in the sky into his mind, and
Mm.
demand of the Reverend character to go deep, like you said with Lovecraft, and demand, like, I need to be the architect, I need to understand way beyond my pay grade. I'm not no longer comforting people, I'm no longer being a guide or a dialogue partner in people's lives. I am the prime mover.
Yeah.
And so that is dark as hell. And he is the madman. And the other characters, they unfortunately they get dragged into some of that with him. And even the stranger that you're talking about, man, he's just like, this is not a happy individual. You know,
Yeah.
what are you guys doing next?
Yeah. What are we
Oh,
doing
we'll
next?
respond to that or whatever.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, what we're doing next, I mean, Paul and I are writing a new film right now. We can't say too much about it. It's, of course, a horror film. I think it's probably about what we'll say at this point. But we also have a book that we wrote that came out a couple of years ago called The Dead Friend Society that was nominated for Best Novel at the Shirley Jackson
I
Awards.
remember that. I forgot
That's
that.
Thank you. And that, so we might do, take a crack at readapting that. So we've got, there's no immediate green light where next week we're filming a new movie, but we are definitely planning what the next one is going to be at this stage.
Well, okay. They're telling
Yeah.
me to wrap up, but go ahead, Paul. What were
No,
you saying?
no, Peter covered it. I wanted to thank you, David. Like these were such great questions. I loved
Thank
talking
you.
about this with you, and loved kind of what you got from the film and engaging with it on this level was really fun to talk about.
This is my
Yes,
whole
thank
life.
you.
This is my whole life of having these kinds of conversations. If I could just go from one to another every single day, um, I feel it's so important to validate people as they wrestle with these things. And I think even the goofiest things we create, the worst movies we make, whatever, I think there's always some of that in there. And all we can be is partners on the journey with one another. So, yeah.
Yes, sir.
Well,
Thank
thanks
you.
for going on it
Right
with us.
on,
And we'll see
guys.
you at Fantastic Fest, I'm sure.
Oh,
Yeah.
good. All right,
Yeah.
great. I'll see you there.
All right.
Later,
See
David.
ya.
Bye.
Thanks.